Electricity is the flow of electric charge. Electricity is measured in several ways, including volts, watts, amps, and ohms. Let's discuss each of those briefly. First is voltage. That's a representation of potential energy. Sometimes it's more simply referred to as pressure or electrical pressure. Its unit of measurement is volts, or V. For example, here in this image, we have a circuit panel, and you might have a 120 volt AC line. And, some of these are going to be 120, they might be 240, it depends. But generally in the United States, we have 120 volts, and sometimes it's referred to as 115. So that's an example of that type of power. Now that's alternating current. So the power starts here at the panel, it goes out to the AC outlets and returns back and cycles through. Another example is what we have internally in a computer. Now in a computer we use DC power, direct current, which is basically one way. And so inside a computer, inside your computer, your PSU, your power supply unit, will need to supply several rails of power. And the most important ones for the exams are going to be 3.3 volts, 5 volts, and 12 volts. It'll also supply negative voltages and standby voltages and so on, but the important ones that you know for the exam are 3.3, 5, and 12 volts. So internally in the computer, it's working as direct current. So two examples of voltage. And your PSU is going to have the equipment necessary to convert from alternating current to direct current. And it does that with a transformer and a rectifier. The rectifier is really what does the conversion. Next is wattage, or electric power. That is the rate of electric energy in a circuit, measured in watts, or W. So, for example, our power supply here could possibly be a 600 watt power supply. That's a common number, but it could be anywhere from, say, 200 or 300 watts all the way up to 1,500 or 2,000 watts. Next is amperage, or electric current. That's the movement of electric charge, measured in amperes or amps, or A. And so, for example, these 120 volt circuits that we have here, they're going to be rated in amps. And quite often in the United States, a typical household, the amount will be 15 amps, possibly 20 amps. And in an office building or office structure, it'll normally be 20 amps. So you may say, okay, on that particular circuit, let's say I have a 20 amp circuit in an office building. How many computers can I put onto that circuit? Well, you can figure that out by dividing watts by volts. So we would do watts divided by volts equals amps. And so, for example, we could take our 600 watts power supply and divide that by the volts that we're using, which will normally be 120. And that'll give us 5 amps. So we want 5 amps for a particular computer that's going to be running. Now, it could be less than that. You might not draw all that power at the same time. It depends on what's inside the computer and so on. But effectively, we could then say, okay, we can have 4 computers on a 20 amp circuit. Now, of course, you have to add monitors and things like that, but they use a lot less power than the computer itself and that PSU, that's 600 watts. But generally, you could do about 3 or 4 computers on a 20 amp circuit. And finally, impedance, which is the amount of resistance to electricity. And that's measured in ohms. And so, for example, you might use an anti-static strap when you're working on computers. That should have a resistor in it, and that should be rated as 1 mega ohm, which will resist electricity coming back from any outlet or anything you might have that connected to. And the anti-static strap helps in, the idea with that is it helps with the release of static discharge through the strap and out to whatever you're connecting to as a ground. But if anything does happen to come back from that connection, then the resistor will help to protect you. And you might also test for continuity with cables. And, you're looking for the zero resistance or 0 ohms when you do that. And I show how to do that in some videos with particular cables. But the most common measurements you'll see on the exam are going to be voltage and wattage. So those are the 2 that you really need to be ready for. But be ready for any of the 4 for the IT field. And there's a little Power 101 for you.